Carolina, a young, newlywed woman, wakes up with the feeling that her life is finally on track. She and her husband, Pedro, had planned every step of their life together, dreaming of the idea of having children in the not-so-distant future. One day, unexpectedly, Carolina realizes that she is pregnant, something that takes her by surprise but leaves her deeply moved. She feels a happiness she had never imagined, but also a silent apprehension about what this new phase of her life could really mean. Soon, the news is shared with her families. Everyone celebrates and pressures her with expectations, not only because it is a natural step for the couple, but also because it is the dream of so many women. "Now you are going to be a mother, Carolina. How happy," say her aunts, looking at her with a glow of pride. However, inside, Carolina is already beginning to feel the weight of the pressure to become the perfect mother, someone who can never fail in her choices. The idea of an idealized life seems to be far from being as simple as she imagined. During a routine checkup, the doctor reveals something that Carolina never imagined she would hear. Blood tests and ultrasounds show that the baby has a rare and serious condition that has been life-threatening since the beginning of the pregnancy. Unfortunately, there is no guarantee that the pregnancy will have a healthy end. The situation is serious, the doctor says in a technical but human tone, trying to explain the situation without causing panic. Carolina leaves the appointment in a state of shock, her world beginning to crumble in the face of the pain of knowing that the child she so desired might not survive. She returns home, trying not to show what she feels. Pedro immediately realizes that something is wrong, but the woman hides her pain. In silence, Carolina begins to blame herself, thinking that perhaps she did something wrong during the first months of pregnancy. She obsessively researches the rare condition, trying everything to find a miracle solution that will make her believe that everything can work out. However, the weight of reality begins to become unbearable, and her hopes slowly fade away. The weeks pass, and Carolina feels increasingly alone and isolated. The pressure from social media, family and friends to maintain a positive image of what should be a happy pregnancy suffocates her. "Don't show weakness, Carolina. You'll make it," say her friends, the same ones who, months before, told her that pregnancy would be the pinnacle of her life. But inside, fear takes over, and she begins to question if there is something darker going on, something that no one wants to see. She tries to smile, but inside, she is broken. Pedro, in turn, also deals with his own feelings. He sees his wife suffering and feels immensely helpless, unable to protect her or find a solution. They both live in a limbo where hope seems to be disappearing, but there is still a constant attempt to hold on to a vision that perhaps something can save that dream. However, each day brings more doubts and fewer answers. With each doctor's appointment, the chances of success diminish, to the point where Carolina begins to understand that the fight for the baby's life may be longer and more painful than she imagined. Carolina feels pressured from all directions. On one hand, her family tells her that it is a battle that must be won at any cost. "You will overcome, my daughter. Everything will be fine. We know that God is with you." On the other, she feels that society expects her to have superhuman strength to not show pain. When she tries to share her insecurities with friends, she receives empty words and cliches like, "You will be the most wonderful mother." What no one realizes is that what she needs most is the right to feel, the right to be afraid, and to not have to hide the pain that invades her heart. But deep down, Carolina begins to feel like the only person who understands her is herself. She tries, despite the pain that consumes her, to maintain the image of a strong woman who fights for her son. However, the pressure begins to affect her mental health. She feels like a puppet, dancing to the tune of other people's expectations, unable to rebel against her own emotions. The internal conflict becomes increasingly difficult to bear. The worst happens when, after a series of tests and days of waiting, the doctors confirm that the baby's condition is incurable and the pregnancy will be terminated. The blow is devastating, and Carolina finds herself facing anticipated mourning without even having the chance to see her son's face. The emptiness is immense and unbearable. What was a dream turns into a cruel reality, and Carolina feels that, in some way, she has failed. The feeling of helplessness consumes her, and she begins to question her own identity as a woman, mother, and wife. She never imagined that she would go through something so painful. Pedro, not knowing how to support his wife, tries to find words of comfort, but nothing seems to be enough. He is also devastated, but he needs to be strong to support Karolina. They both feel as if they are in a nightmare, where the pain has no end. But the hardest part is facing their own insecurity that something could have been done to prevent the tragedy. Silence takes over the house and the relationship between them. It is a shared pain, but no one knows exactly how to deal with it. After the loss, Karolina begins to face something that no one warned her about: the devastating psychological impact that a miscarriage or pregnancy loss can cause. She finds herself on an emotional roller coaster, where at times she feels angry at herself for not having been strong enough to carry on, and at other times she feels an immense emptiness for not being able to connect with the idea of being a mother again. She begins to distance herself from everyone who was once her support network, as if the weight of the loss were too much to bear. Grief, which many do not see as true pain, begins to consume Karolina. She observes other pregnant women and feels a pang of sadness and even anger, because the vision of motherhood, which had always been a promise of happiness, has now become a bitter memory. She feels that the world does not understand her pain, as if it were something small and easy to overcome. Other women can move on. Why can't I? Karolina thinks. Isolation becomes a refuge, but also an emotional prison that she does not know how to break. When she tries to return to her daily life, Karolina realizes that no one wants to talk about her loss. People, trying to be polite, avoid her, or talk about the forbidden topic with words that don't touch her deeply. When someone mentions her pregnancy, she fakes a smile, as if the loss hadn't happened. This silence becomes even more painful. The grief of motherhood is often minimized by those around her, who don't understand the depth of the emptiness she feels. Karolina, increasingly alone, begins to question the way society views women who face pregnancy loss. For everyone else, it's just a matter of moving on, but for her, the void of what could have been is immense. She feels disconnected from her feminine identity, as if the only value her life has is anchored in the possibility of being a mother. The pressure of perfect motherhood, which society so often promotes, is overwhelming, and she feels that she has failed miserably in this role, even though she knew she had no control over what happened. Over time, Karolina begins to reflect on the social pressure that has always accompanied the desire to be a mother. Conversations about children, pregnancy, and even debates about how to be the perfect mother began to seem absurd to her. She realizes that women are often seen only as potential mothers, and when motherhood does not happen the way society expects, it is as if the ideal woman loses part of her identity. Now, after the loss, Karolina begins to question the true meaning of motherhood and what it represents beyond everyone's expectations. She also realizes that stories about motherhood never address the possibility of loss. No one talks openly about women who are unable to carry their pregnancies to term, or about those who, due to circumstances beyond their control, will never have the privilege of being mothers in the way they envisioned. This lack of representation and support ends up making women who face these challenges feel even more isolated. Karolina decides that somehow she needs to share her experience, not only to honor what she has lost, but also to challenge the expectations of perfection that she believes need to be challenged. As she struggles to cope with her grief, Karolina begins to find unexpected support in places she never expected. Women who, like her, have experienced pregnancy loss and who share their own stories of grief. These encounters help her realize that, despite the loneliness she feels, there are many other women going through the same pain, often in silence. What begins as a small, informal support group becomes a true foundation for Karolina. The exchange of experiences and feelings allows her to free herself from the bonds of shame she feels for not being able to maintain the pregnancy. She gradually learns that the pain of loss is not something that needs to be hidden, and that the vulnerability shared between women makes them stronger, not weaker. In this space, Karolina can be who she really is, without judgment, without masks. The pain does not diminish, but she begins to understand that, by sharing her pain with others, the guilt she carried seems a little lighter. Over time, Karolina begins to realize that part of the pain of loss is linked to the idealized image she had of motherhood. Since she was little, she grew up hearing about how wonderful it would be to be a mother, how her life would be meaningful when she had a child. Motherhood, then, becomes something to be achieved, almost like a personal victory, a seal of success for the woman. However, the loss of her baby makes her question this perspective. The perfect mother she always imagined is not a reality, and she realizes that many of the ideas that society passes on about being a mother are, in fact, distorted. She begins to understand that being a mother is not about a life without flaws, pain, or challenges. Motherhood is complex, often full of losses, insecurities, and challenges that not all women are prepared to face. Carolina realizes that, perhaps, real maternal love is not about perfection, but about resilience in the face of adversity. Days turn into weeks, and finally, the idea that pregnancy loss is a reality that Carolina cannot change begins to solidify. She realizes that in order to move forward, she must first accept that she had no control over what happened. Miscarriage, although very common, is still a taboo that is difficult to break. The lack of dialogue around the topic makes her feel disconnected, as if her pain is a secret that no one really understands. The stigma that miscarriage is something that is not talked about weighs heavily on her. Carolina finds herself at a crossroads, where she must decide whether to continue hiding her pain or to finally seek healing through acceptance and sharing. The doctor's words about the miscarriage, something that happens to many women and is not her fault, begin to make sense, but it is difficult to shake off the feeling of failure. Meanwhile, Pedro tries, with good intentions, to find a way to help her cope, but at times his support seems distant, as if he is treating her grief as something temporary. Carolina wishes that she could somehow show him the depth of what she is feeling. As Carolina's grief begins to transform into a deeper, more conscious grief, she realizes that the experience of pregnancy loss has changed her forever. The woman she was before the pregnancy and loss no longer exists. She has become someone who has more empathy, more understanding for women going through the same kind of pain. She begins to look for ways to turn her grief into something positive, helping others who are going through the same silent grief. Carolina decides to use her experience to talk about the importance of breaking the taboos surrounding pregnancy loss. She begins sharing her story on social media, no longer out of fear of being judged, but with the intention of creating a safe space where other women can talk about their pain without fear or shame. She then finds a deeper purpose that gives new meaning to her experience. Motherhood no longer seems to her to be an idealized achievement, but rather a painful but important process. Carolina feels that by sharing her truth, she is helping to transform a stigma into empathy. As Carolina moved deeper and deeper into her healing process, Pedro found himself at a loss as to how he could best support his wife. He struggled to be understanding, but at the same time, he felt frustrated at not knowing how to deal with her grief. This created an unspoken tension in their marriage, with Pedro trying to be the strong one and Carolina the weak. He felt that no matter how hard he tried, he could never fully connect with her suffering. Carolina's pain was complex and deep, and it often left him speechless. In moments of greater vulnerability, Pedro began to realize that Carolina's suffering was not something he could simply fix. He needed to understand that there was no quick fix for her pain, and that grieving would be a unique process for her. The situation forced them both to reevaluate the dynamics of their relationship and to understand that, while he could be supportive, true healing would come from within Carolina, from her own journey of acceptance and rebuilding. Their vulnerability, now exposed, allowed for a deep reconnection between them, but it was also fertile ground for tension. After a few months of mourning and reflection, Carolina begins to realize that she needs to get back to her routine and give her life a new direction. She returns to work, but she is not the same woman who left. When she returns to her work as a journalist, she feels a mix of feelings: the desire to dedicate herself to her work and the constant presence of the pain that she still carries within her. At meetings and events, she feels a disconnect with her colleagues, who seem to not understand why the loss still affects her so much. Some try to offer advice on moving on, but for Carolina, this seems impossible. Upon returning to work, she comes across new discoveries and articles that address women's mental health and the impact of pregnancy loss. She realizes that the topic is more present than she imagined, but it is still surrounded by taboos and silence. Her own story of pain makes her want to write about the subject, but she finds herself torn between maintaining her privacy and opening up to the world. The decision to share her experience with the public becomes a challenging but also liberating decision. By writing again about what she felt and still feels, she feels that she is recovering a part of herself that had been lost. As Carolina immerses herself in her work and begins to speak out more about pregnancy loss, she begins to realize that society has a very superficial way of dealing with women's grief. Those around her, including friends, family, and co-workers, for the most part, downplay the impact of pregnancy loss, as if it were a temporary event that could be quickly overcome. The pressure to move on and return to normal intensifies, and Carolina feels pressured to act as if everything is okay, even when it is not. She begins to question why society in general tends to hide and minimize the pain of women who experience pregnancy loss. She realizes that women are often seen as strong or brave when dealing with grief, but they are rarely seen as vulnerable or in need of support. To society, motherhood is seen as a desired end, and the loss of a baby is seen as a failure. Carolina becomes increasingly aware of the lack of support and unrealistic expectations placed on women, forcing them to move on without sufficient time to grieve and heal. Over time, Carolina realizes that her own grief journey could be a way to help other women feel less alone. She begins to think of ways to create a safe and welcoming space where women who have experienced pregnancy loss can express themselves without judgment. The idea of starting a support group for women who have faced the loss of a child, where they can share their experiences and find support, begins to take shape. Carolina feels that by doing this, she can provide a sense of belonging and help other women deal with their grief in a healthy way. When researching existing support groups, Carolina realized there was a lack of truly accessible and open spaces for women who have faced this type of loss. Many women end up dealing with their grief alone, for fear of being misunderstood or judged. This motivated her even more to create a community, a space where women can express themselves, vent, and most importantly, heal. The decision to create a space for them is more than a way to help. It is also a way to continue her own healing journey. As Carolina begins to work on creating the support group, she and Pedro face a new challenge: how this new journey will impact their relationship. While Pedro is supportive, he feels a bit left out, as Carolina becomes increasingly absorbed in her mission to help other women. Creating the support group takes time, energy, and dedication, and she often finds herself away from home, working on her plans and connecting with women who share similar stories of loss. Pedro, who has always been her pillar of strength, now finds himself struggling with his own insecurity, fearing that Carolina's grief will eventually affect their marriage. Carolina tries to balance her dedication to her project and her relationship, but soon realizes that she needs to communicate more with Pedro. She begins to understand that, although her mission to help other women is important, her marriage also needs attention. This dynamic begins to force them to have deeper conversations about their emotional needs, expectations, and how they can build a space of mutual support, where they can both deal with grief in different ways, but together. Their relationship, once marked by tranquility, is now tested by these unexpected challenges. However, as they learn to support each other, they end up creating a stronger connection. With the support of a few women who have joined her, Carolina has seen the support group grow organically and emotionally deeply. The weekly meetings provide a space for not only venting, but also for learning from each other. Carolina realizes that many of the women who come to her carry similar wounds, but also a strong desire to rebuild their lives. The group becomes a foundation of support in the midst of her grief, and soon she feels that the pain of her loss no longer defines her. She begins to see the value of her personal experience and how she can help other women see the meaning of their own grief. The group grows, and the stories shared become more moving and profound. The collective experience of grief, when shared and validated, creates an environment where women begin to rise up, even when there are no easy solutions to the pain. Carolina learns that the grieving process does not have a set timeline, and that healing comes from within, in each woman, at her own pace. Through these meetings, she also finds a new reason to live and continues to see her life purpose in a clearer and more empathetic way. While Carolina finds strength in the support group and the women she supports, Pedro also begins his own journey of self-discovery. He realizes that for too long, he has dedicated himself to being his wife's support without considering his own emotional needs. He begins a process of seeking psychological help, which helps him better understand the silent pain he carried and the feelings of helplessness he felt in relation to Carolina's suffering. This journey makes him realize that, although he dedicated himself to helping Carolina, he also needed support and space to process his own pain. Over time, Pedro finds new ways to be by Carolina's side, not as a figure who solves problems, but as someone who is there to listen and share his emotions without pressure or expectations. Their relationship becomes stronger and more balanced. They learn to be more vulnerable with each other and to understand that there is no right way to deal with loss, but that together they can face challenges in a healthier way. This process of rediscovering their marriage is not easy, but it becomes one of the greatest sources of strength for both of them. As time passes, Carolina begins to accept her loss and understand that grief is not a straight line. She gives herself permission to have good days and bad days. At times, the pain is overwhelming, but at other times, she feels at peace with her own journey. Accepting loss does not mean forgetting, but rather learning to live with the pain, knowing that life goes on in a different way. She begins to envision a future where her mission to help other women does not depend on her pain, but on her ability to transform that pain into something positive for others. Through this gradual acceptance, Carolina discovers that healing is more about allowing herself to feel and express her pain than about seeking a solution to her suffering. She begins to see her loss in a more compassionate way and feels more connected to herself. As she looks to the future, she knows that even with the pain of her loss, there is so much more to live and offer. This balance between pain and healing becomes the foundation of her new life. Over time, Carolina begins to consider the possibility of becoming a mother again, but now with a more balanced and mature view of what motherhood really means to her. Throughout her healing journey, she realizes that the desire to be a mother does not have to be an imposed social expectation, but something deeply personal. She begins to explore the idea of having a child when she feels ready, without putting pressure on herself to follow a timeline predetermined by society or the pain of her previous loss. Carolina learns that motherhood, when the time is right, will be more of a conscious and empowered decision rather than an imposition of the need to fill a void. This new understanding of motherhood also makes her realize how much she has to offer other women. By sharing her story, Carolina realizes that her experience of loss and the way she deals with it can be inspiring and a guide for other women who, like her, face grief and the social pressures of motherhood. She then begins to explore new career paths, including speaking on women's emotional health and the importance of redefining family expectations. Carolina's future, now brighter and lighter, is a journey of new beginnings and new dreams, but always with the reminder that pain can coexist with hope and rebirth. Over time, Carolina has built a legacy of support and empathy, serving as an inspiration to all women seeking strength in the face of adversity. Her support group has become a reference in the country, and she continues to be a tireless advocate for women's mental health. The women she has helped, and who have also helped her heal, share their stories of overcoming, creating an even larger network of solidarity and understanding. Carolina, who initially faced her loss with despair, is now a voice for change, teaching everyone that pain does not define the end of a life, but rather the beginning of a new journey of self-discovery. Over time, Carolina also comes to terms with her own idea of motherhood. She now understands that true motherhood goes beyond the birth of a biological child. Motherhood is also about giving birth to new dreams, new projects, and new meanings, and she begins to see this in every step she takes in her new life mission. Her story, her legacy, and the way she transformed her pain into hope are a reminder that life is full of new beginnings, and that even the deepest losses can generate new paths of light and transformation.